Okay, so we were doing this one, right? And then we can grab this, okay. And this exercise is mostly about asking questions, as it says here. So we'll just read through the question and see if we can come up with some of our own. And K strings earliest in the array. Okay. A distinct string is a string that is present only once in an array. Okay. Given an array of strings, RA, and an integer K. Okay, so the array of strings is R and an integer K. Return the kth distinct string present in the array. If there are fewer than K distinct elements, return an empty string. Note that the result string is the one encountered earliest in the array. Okay. Read the question again. So distinct string, that's, I guess, sort of like a term. So like we would just obviously want to ask a question about this. So a distinct string. And it's present only once in an array. And so we don't have to really worry about words because it's an array. So they're just separated by commas, just elements. So we don't have to worry about any question about like, okay, what is a word? Yeah, okay, so given an array of strings and integer K, okay, return the kth distinct string present in array. If there are fewer than K distinct elements, okay, then return an empty string. Okay. Note that the result string is the one encountered earliest in the array. Okay. Okay, so if we just grab this test case, I'm gonna look at it here. So we've got a couple of, and the elements are always going to be strings, okay. If there are fewer than K distinct strings, return an empty string. Okay. So I'm wondering, okay, so initial questions here. So can I do it this way? Hello? Hello, hello? No, I guess not. Oh, no, it is working. Okay, cool. So we're gonna do that. Would an element in the array whose value is an empty string be considered a distinct string? Question mark. Okay, so there's one question. So I'm thinking like if we had something like this, that was like, and there say it's this one. So 0, 1, 2, or sorry, 0. So distinct. Earliest in the array. So the second distinct string present, the kth distinct string. So initially I would have thought that it would have been C here, right? Because, well, it's the second distinct string. So kth, so it'd be D, B, C, B. So that's no longer distinct. And then C, so 0, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Oh, interesting. The kth distinct string present in array. If there are fewer than K distinct strings, return an empty string. Okay. This is a weird question. All right, so given an array of strings, array and integer K, return the kth distinct string present in array. If there are fewer than K distinct, okay, so this part makes sense. I'm just gonna drop that in the rules. explicit rules. Okay. And probably should have, well, okay, we've been going for like 5 minutes, so I'll just start a timer here for 35 minutes. Okay. So I guess I'm trying to understand why it's A. So it's, okay, a distinct string is a string that is present only once. Oh, okay. So the other distinct string is D, right? So we see it once. Okay. And then we see, okay. I guess a general question that I don't know would actually be relevant here, but does case matter? Comma, would capital B and lowercase b be considered the same? Question mark. Okay, so does case matter? Would B and B be considered the same? E.g., non-distinct. Okay. Okay. Okay, so a distinct string, I guess, so then be a case, so a string that only appears okay, so a string that only appears once in the input array. I think empty space is a character, is it not? If we did like node object empty string 1. Yeah, okay, so that is considered a character. So it's one encounter earliest. Okay. Is present only once in an array, given an array of strings, array an integer k. Okay, so I guess another question here is, will k always be a positive integer? Positive integer? Just, yeah, I mean, just greater than 0. Or I guess greater than -1. Okay, greater than -1, question mark. Yeah, and I guess there's like the possibility, like, do we need to consider zeros to consider positive, negative 0? That's a possibility for k. Okay, there are fewer than k distinct strings. Return an empty string. Note that the result string is one encountered earliest in the array. So, okay. Kth distinct element. So this is, I'm just going to draw this out. So first and then second. Oops. Jesus. Okay. So this is the first one. And this is the second one. So kth, k equals 2. Okay, so does case matter? So that, I think that's a fair question. Would the element in the array whose value be an empty string be considered a distinct string? I'm going to say this one would be yes, probably. And this is going to be no. Not the same. Not the same. Okay, always be positive integer. I think it's fair to say that they don't express it in the question explicitly. So I'm going to say no can be non-pos integer. And then I guess the follow-up question would be like, how should we handle invalid k values? And then that might be like just like a general error message or like an empty string or something. I think returning an error message makes sense. Because if we were just going to do like an empty string, then there would be no way to discern between if it's like a valid k input that just doesn't align with the input array, in the sense that like the elements in the array wouldn't comprise a valid data set for that k value. Okay. And then we've got another one. Do we need to consider positive, negative 0 as a possibility for k? I think this is also like just one that we probably should do like yes. K can be 0, can be a signed. Is that how you spell it? Signed? K can be signed. It can be assigned 0. So mainly we're just thinking for negative. Like if it's positive, that's not really too concerning. Okay. Fewer than k distinct strings. Return an empty string. I mean, I guess like another question would be like, this is kind of in like the general category of questions, but I guess they say it's given an array of strings. So I think we can assume, can we assume that the input array will always be populated by at least one string element? And I think that's actually a fair assumption, given that they express it up here, given an array of strings. They just here, they don't specify. Yeah, okay, so that I think that's a fair assumption to make, that it that we can assume that it will be always populated by at least one string element. Okay, so I think I know. I mean, I've already thought of the algorithm I would use here, but this is more about the questions, right? So like trying to pose the right questions. So do we need to consider positive, negative 0 as a possibility? Will k always be a positive integer? Does case matter? Okay, so we've got like a couple questions here. I don't know if it's like enough questions to like satisfy this problem. I'm sure there's something wrong with how I'm thinking about this. So I think here I've sort of validated the question for myself here. I'm going to what if we did like, so if this was 1, then it would just be D, right? Because this was the first distinct, so the kth, so the 1th element. Okay. And so for when we're talking about like the kth distinct element, like it's not 0 indexed either. So that was another thing I was sort of concerned with, but I think given here, we've got B and then C. So then all of these are non-distinct. And since we're returning the A, then it's clear that, and since K is 2, we can discern that it's not 0 index in terms of how we're counting and getting to that element. All right, so then I guess we gotta think of another test case here. Let's think of like one that's like this or something. So and then just be the like this specific situation. So when we have this, we just are essentially supposed to return empty string, and that's because again, there's only 2 distinct elements in this input array of strings, and yeah, so that's the problem. So there is no kth distinct element because that list would only really be, I guess I can just really show it out. So this is, as far as the distinct elements go, it's just this, that's it. So like, obviously, this is the first one, right? Goodness. First, and second. Okay. So there's no third, and then no third. Okay. And then K is 3. Okay, so that seems pretty good. I mean, obviously this isn't very great coverage as far as my test cases go. And we've got about 25 minutes or so left, which is still a lot of time. So I guess I feel like I don't want to like waste time, because I still want to try to use this as an example problem, but goodness gracious. Oh my God. This is why you should just use your mouse sometimes. Okay, so we have this test case, and we could, I guess, maybe do like this would also be, so like, let's say it's 2. This would also be A, because there's just 2 distinct elements. And I guess something to keep in mind here is that it's the input array, so array of strings, of string elements, and a integer k, integer value k. And then our output needs to be either an empty string or an error message or the kth distinct character, or I guess string, distinct string. Oh my God, my computer's like freezing. The kth distinct string present in the input array. Okay. Oh yeah, well, it's using 63%. That's crazy. Okay. So here's one of these guys. Okay. Let's think about some more of the implicit rules here. So I guess like there's not really, I can't think of any, I haven't, I guess, sussed out any implicit rules about this problem. Like I guess there's like kind of stuff about like what type of input you can expect, but that's not necessarily like rule based. Considered the same. Positive integer, okay. So let's think about this. I guess just, yeah, I can't think of anything right now. So can we assume the input will always be populated by at least one string? Okay, so basically we want, so I guess the main like mental model here I'm thinking is that, and I'm not going to include like any algorithmic thinking here, but I'm just going to try to sum up this problem in 2 sentences or so. So we essentially want to figure out, so I guess, yeah, figure out which elements in the input string, or I'm sorry, in the input array, which string elements in the input array are which of the input strings, or sorry, essentially in this problem we want to figure out which of the string elements in the input array are distinct, and then based on which satisfy this requirement, I guess then from the list of those string elements which satisfy the distinct requirement. So, okay, so figure out which of the string elements in the input array are distinct, and then from that list, from this list of strings, return the kth element, or an empty string. Okay. And then there's like the validation step, but we're trying to not think about the algorithm here. So I guess when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking filtration of input array elements. And I'm also thinking of like creating an object from input array for each entry, for each element in the input array. Okay, so then based on that, I would think that would just look something like, for like the main example here, like it would be like just like a dictionary, right? So like D, B, C, A. Okay, so D is 1, B is 2, and so on, and then A is also 1. So we would get that, and then we would take this and transform it back to an array, and then filter for those which only occur once. And then from there, okay, but something I need to think about here is that we must preserve the order, and an object wouldn't preserve the order, would it? The insertion order. Okay, so that's another thing, and that's actually an implicit rule. So need to, I guess it's also kind of just explicit here. Note that the result string is the one encountered earliest in the array. Okay, so result string is the one encountered. Am I just thinking this? Am I overthinking this? I might be overthinking this. So note that the result string is the one encountered earliest in the array. So I guess my concern here is that so first I'm going to have this this new object, right, that has the number of entries, or the number of occurrences for each individual string, and from there I'm transforming that back to an array of elements, and those elements are going to be two element subarrays, which I would then want to sort. Which I would want to filter for only those which have an occurrence of 1. And I guess my concern here is that it may not preserve the insertion order, because objects do not preserve that. So I need to find some way to preserve insertion order for object. And this might be cheating, but I would think of using a map object here, because from what I understand, maps preserve insertion order, and so that's like an advantage of maps over objects. So, okay, so I think that's one thing I have to consider here. And then another sub-problem here is just validation of input. And so that kind of comes up to a bunch of the questions we asked. So can we assume that the input array will always be populated? Does the case matter? And I'm thinking no, cases. So yes, case does matter. So okay, so yes, case matters. So no, B and B are not the same. Okay. Would an element in the array whose value is an empty string be considered a distinct string? Yes. So we should probably write a test case for that. Okay, so we'll just write that here, and it's going to be D, B, and we'll just add one right here, an empty string. Okay. So this, and then for this would actually be empty string. Okay, so that makes sense because it's the second one, right? We'll just paste that there. First, second, okay, cool. So a fair amount of decent test cases, I would say. Just going to do this. All right. So filtration of create a map for input array for each element. I guess a concern I would have is if I do something like okay, so then we do like map A1. Okay, and then map B is also 1 or something. And then we try to do object entries from map. Okay, and it seems to have preserved the order. Yeah, I guess that's something I would think about. So if we do like map, let's say it's, let's just say for this case that A occurs twice. So maybe just do like map plus plus. So then map, and then object entries map. So it did preserve it, even though that was the initial insertion. Okay, so that's, I think, validated that approach in my mind, so that we will preserve it, and so that we can deal with that that rule here of needing to preserve insertion order. All right, cool. So all right, so then from there, we can, I think, get started on our algorithm here. So we want to guard against. First thing we want to guard against is just maybe invalid data types. So I'm thinking, and that's, I guess, that's sort of assumed, right? So I guess just invalid inputs. And so that would entail, we're mostly thinking about K here. So if K is negative, is a negative integer, or K, or and, I guess, and K, okay, so if K is a negative integer, and this includes -0, then we would need to guard against that. So just like error message, invalid K. Will K always be a positive number? No, it can be non-positive integer. How would we handle, so that we're using the error message? Okay, and then we also have to consider the signed 0. Can we assume the input array will always be populated by at least one string element? Yes. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything where we don't, like, we can't assume that the input is just going to be a valid array and it's going to be of length greater than 1. I'm not going to write any more guard clause stuff, I think, because the problem states that it's going to be an array of strings. So, I mean, I guess there's the case of, like, do we have to worry about sparse arrays, right? Sparse arrays, or anything else with arrays? And I mean, at this point in the problem, like, I should have figured out if that was going to be a problem, but I think based on the questions I had asked up until this point, those questions would have been answered. So I'm not too concerned with that in terms of this problem. Yeah, so let's think about the next step. So we've essentially validated our input, right? Now we need to figure out which of the elements in the input array are distinct. And so I was thinking we would just use a map object and produce that map. So I think it would be essentially like traverse input array of strings. And then for each element string, we want to create an entry in our map or increment the value of an existing entry. So if entry, or if prop exists in map, then we want to increment that property's value, props value by 1, else does not exist in map. Then we want to create that property, prop, and initialize value to 1. Initialize value to 1. Okay. And so essentially here we're just creating this map object. So I'm just going to write that here. So create map. All right. And then once we do that, we then want to filter the input element, the input array elements, and we need, so I guess from here we need to transform map object into array of subarrays, entries. Okay. And from there, filter array of arrays by entry value. By entry, so I guess it's just, so like this is just going to look like, it's, so like say it's like an entry, it would just be the second element. And the filtration condition is we want to select for those which have distinct ones, so if their value is 1. Select those elements, those subarrays whose value is 1. All right. Once we've done that, so we've transformed and filtered, we would then want to, I think we would want to map the filtered array of subarrays into an array of strings again. And then based on this thing, based on that mapped array of strings, we want to get the kth element. All right, so we only have 7 minutes. So I don't actually think I have time to walk through an example, unfortunately, but I feel like I've done enough up to this point where the coding portion of this interview question should go smoothly. All right, so if we were to, I'm gonna pull this down. All right, so function distinct string, array, and k. All right, so the first thing, and I already know this is a helper method, or a helper function, so don't have to worry too much about that. And so I guess our initial condition is if k is less than 0, or k is equal to -0, or k, or if type of, so I guess that should probably be the first portion here. Okay, so if type of k, type of k is not a number, or if k is less than 0, or if k is equal to -0, and for all of those, we just return invalid k. Okay. And I'm not going to worry about sparse arrays here. So I guess we get into the next step, which would be creating that map object. So const map is, I guess we'll actually call this occurrences. And we're going to create a helper function. So make map, and we're going to pass in our array as the argument. Once we have that, I'll just, I guess, fill out the rest of this problem, we want to transform the map object into an array of subarrays. So this is going to be const sub arrays, or we'll just call this entries. And it's just going to be object entries occurrences. All right. Once we have that, we then want to filter the array of arrays. So filter subarrays, filtered entries, and it's just going to be entries filter subarray. Actually, let's use, I think, yeah, so it's going to be, this thing is going to be an array, and we want to filter with the value. So we can use that syntax where value equals 1. That's our filtration consideration. So yeah, I'm going to stop there just to validate that everything's working up until this point. So I'm going to return occurrences. And now I need to write, what is this? It says it doesn't like something. Could not find occurrences. Yeah, I guess I misspelled it. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we're gonna write our helper function here. Make map array. All right. And we're just gonna use reduce here. So return array dot reduce. And at this point, it's just an array of strings. So we'll just do string, or rather accumulator. Oops. Accumulator current. Okay. And we're going to use a new map object. Oops. Whoa. Map. All right. So our algorithm states that we need to, so if the property exists in map, so if accumulator current, if that exists, or I guess if it doesn't exist, that's how we had initially written the algorithm. So, or no, if it does exist in map, okay. So if it exists, then we want to increment that property's value by 1. So accumulator current plus plus. Otherwise, we want to, so this is in the case where it does not exist, we want to create that property in the map, which is just that code. And then at the end, we obviously want to return accumulator so that we preserve that object we're building. So let's actually, I'm gonna just test my make map function. Console log make map, and let's just use this one, the core test case that we're given. All right, and exit. Okay, and then where are we? We're in live coding. So change directory, live coding. Oh no, we're already here. Okay, so node 1.js. So we've got that map object, and it looks like it did. Yeah, okay, that looks good. So from here, we can move on because we know that this is working. And let's actually, yeah, let's run these test cases again so that we know that it's working inside our core function, and it looks like it is. Yeah, cool, okay. So once we have this, we've got about a minute left. I think we can get it done. We need to, so let's see if our transformed object works. So return entries. Okay, and so that's that subarray of, or the array of subarrays. So once we have that, we were filtering by the value, right? So if we return filtered entries, okay. Great, so now we're seeing that. And so once we have our filtered entries, we then wanted to map it, right? So we're thinking map the filtered array of subarrays into an array of strings. So we'll do just like const array strings. And this is gonna be filtered entries dot map. And again, we're thinking these are subarrays, right? So we only want the string. We don't care about the other element. So we just want to return the string. Okay, so if we return array of strings, let's take a look. Great. And it preserved the order. Yeah, so then looks like we're just about out of time, but I guess the last thing we have to do, which I guess I didn't state in my algorithm, which is probably not good. We want to essentially, take this array of strings. So I'm just gonna actually write it in English. So from this array of strings, we want to return the kth element if it exists, or an empty string. Okay, so I guess we have to check here if array of strings length is less than k, then we just need to return empty string. Otherwise, we can just do array of strings at k, and this is going to be, so obviously array indexes are 0, or array elements are 0 indexed, and k is not. So what's the direction we need to go? I think it'd be k minus 1. Yeah, okay. So I think we just have to return that value, right? So A, D, and then we were thinking it should be an empty string. Yeah, and then A again, and empty string. All right, and I'm just going to, yeah, that seems good. We got through it. Took about 40-ish minutes. Was really focusing mostly on answering questions for myself and trying to come up with questions about the problem. But I was pretty happy with the implementation here. I think there's probably a better way to do this, or a way that doesn't involve using like a kind of more fancy data structure like a map. But yeah, I mean, this is a very simple problem, but it can get confusing, or you can get off track if you misinterpret the problem description. Initially, I didn't really get the problem, so it took a little while to suss out, okay, what is this problem actually asking? And then from there, it was just kind of a matter of trying, based on the information that I had of the problem and based on the test case that I was given, where could I go wrong with this problem? And I'm guessing I made a mistake somewhere. I'm guessing there's something wrong with how I interpreted this problem, because if there wasn't, then why would I be doing this problem, right? So yeah, I'm hoping I got something wrong so I can learn something, but that was the problem, and I'm going to hit stop record. Thanks for watching if you made it this far.